Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Gwei Refuel, where I recap the latest news in the Ethereum ecosystem. I'm your host, Anthony Sassano, and today's the 9th of February, 2022. Alright everyone, let's jump into it. So, basically today I put out a tweet, and this was the kind of like topic of today's newsletter, where I said, 99% of people who own crypto never use the product that the coin/token is associated with. They buy things based on narratives usually spread by the BitBoys of the world. This is who you are trading against. Just being on crypto Twitter puts you ahead of almost everyone. Now, first off, I had a few replies to this saying that the BitBoy fans and other kind of like YouTubers like BitBoy fans are on crypto Twitter. I'm going to be honest, guys, I don't actually consider the BitBoy crypto shill side part of Twitter, crypto Twitter. I consider crypto Twitter to be the fundamental side, right? And that's a very kind of like small circle. So I think that the definitions kind of got a little bit mumbled up there or jumbled up there. But yeah, that was kind of like my point there. But I guess my overall point is that I've explained to you guys that people kind of like buy these tokens and coins on centralized exchanges, keep them there, and barely any actually end up using the on-chain products. You know, I've seen some estimates of there being hundreds of millions of people that have own crypto on a centralized exchange. And that's all well and good, but that doesn't mean that they're actually using the on-chain products, and most of them haven't. You know, if you go and look at some statistics around this, so the total number of unique Ethereum addresses is 187 million at time of recording. Now, we all know that people have multiple Ethereum addresses. It costs nothing to create an Ethereum address there. I mean, technically all Ethereum addresses are already created, but it basically costs nothing to kind of like have a new one, besides like the fees. I think the way Etherscan registers it is that you have to at least have had something interact with the on-chain with the address before it'll actually register it, because as I said, technically all Ethereum addresses are already created. It's just when you interact with it, it means you've got the private key for it, all that good stuff there. So yeah, 187 million, and I mean, it doesn't cost nothing, but it basically just costs the gas fee or costs an exchange fee to withdraw some ETH or tokens to that address to register it. Now, in saying that, people have many different addresses. Like I alone probably have used, at the very least 50 addresses just on my own that have actually had on-chain interactions. Not to mention all the centralized exchange Ethereum addresses that I've used over the years, which I don't count as part of that 50. You know, you can have multiple addresses on some exchanges, and they are definitely counted in that. And then you kind of like take into account like all the bots and things like that. Realistically, the amount of individuals that have an Ethereum address is quite low. And I actually think a good way of I guess like measuring super active individuals or on-chain individuals is ENS names. Now, I think last time I checked, ENS names that were actually tied to an address and resolved to an address was maybe a couple 100,000 or something like that. So I think that's a pretty accurate kind of, I guess, measure of people on chain, at least in the Ethereum ecosystem. Obviously, there's other ecosystems, but you know, if I had to kind of like take a stab here of monthly active Ethereum kind of like users or monthly active on-chain users, we have stats from MetaMask where it says, you know, there's tens of millions, but that was during like, I guess the months where the market was very bullish. Today, if I had to guess, like the active users over the last month of any chain, probably a few million, maybe at that. I mean, you know, it could even be much less than that, given that the market quietened down a bit. And I would actually think if you're counting a lot of the people who are using MetaMask to connect to kind of like other chains, especially to things like BSC, which was like a retail casino, if you take away all of that, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to see it even at less than a million right now, you know, because the market's so quiet. So taking that all into account, the 99% figure that I quote here is rather accurate, and it's probably not enough, because 99%, 100 million minus 99% is like around a million, right? So if you kind of like take that and extrapolate that out, there's probably more than 100 million people at this stage around the world that have bought crypto in some form or another, I think, from estimates that I've seen. But as I said, most of those people have never used anything on chain. And, you know, I've got a perfect example here that I thought of before. Cardano went to $100 billion in market cap without smart contracts, if I'm remembering correctly, which means that you couldn't do anything on the Cardano blockchain except for sending assets, sending ADA to and from, I guess, like different addresses. And most of the time, the ADA being sent was done for arbitrage between exchanges and all that sort of stuff there. And maybe some people kind of like were throwing a cold storage, but not very many. So from that perspective, there were probably millions of people who owned ADA because it was just like retail's favorite coin. Like I had my friends' dads asking me about it. They didn't ask me about ETH. They asked me about ADA. So from that perspective, they would never use anything on chain. By the way, they're literally on like the most centralized of centralized exchanges, buying this stuff based on a newspaper article that they read. Like funny enough, right? Or some kind of like mainstream article that they've read. That is to me the perfect example of you're kind of like, I guess, token or coin can have millions and millions of holders with near zero users, which is quite, amazing when you think about it. And it kind of like illustrates just how early we are on the on-chain side of things. And it kind of illustrates how you can't just look at people buying kind of like crypto assets as an adoption metric. I actually don't think that's a great adoption metric. It's fine for the prices, and it explains why the market gets very, very, very ahead of the tech, but it doesn't give us any kind of accurate indication of on-chain adoption. Now, of course, if in the future a lot of the on-chain adoption is done via third parties and kind of like centralized intermediaries, such as the exchanges offering, like windows into DeFi, and they're just using one address to process all of this sort of stuff, then it's going to be even harder to measure that. But in terms of like actual on-chain users doing it themselves, there's not that many people. And that's a major reason why we're still early. And as I said, a major reason why the prices get very, very detached from the actual on-chain usage. So I just wanted to kind of like highlight that. Something definitely to think about and keep your kind of like... keep your eye on. When I start seeing this kind of like shift, that's when I'll start thinking that we're not early anymore. But this shift is going to take ages. Like, let's be frank. Most people get into crypto to make quick money. They don't give a shit about anything else initially, at least when they first get in. Like most people. Some people do, but most people don't, right? Most people, or at least pretty much everyone that has ever asked me about crypto in real life, doesn't lead with the tech. They lead with the market side of it. They say, how do I invest? Or what should I put my money into? Or, kind of like what exchange should I use? All that sort of stuff. It's never, what can you do with this technology? What does it enable? Like, what's different about it compared to this? Blah, blah, blah. And that's fine. Some people, I kind of like get that side of things. Like, and to be honest, like not everyone's going to be interested in this sort of stuff. But it just kind of like illustrates to you the point that I'm trying to make here is that there's a massive detachment from who's actually buying crypto on centralized exchanges and holding it there and who's actually using on-chain things. So you can go look at any metrics or stats that you want for on-chain stuff. You can use Dune Analytics, Nansen, Coinmetrics, Glassnode, any metric you want for on-chain stuff. And it'll show you the same kind of like picture that I'm showing you, that on-chain users are very, very low. And some people might say, this is bearish, right? Like, where are all the users? And like, this is bullish, guys. It means that we still haven't even tapped into really the early adopters of this sort of thing yet and getting them on board, which means that we have so much left to build. There's so much opportunity left. There's so much opportunity for, if you're doing on-chain stuff, for you guys to make outsized returns because you're trading against these people. And trading against doesn't mean that you're actually kind of like directly kind of like shorting someone that going long on something or longing someone short on it. What it means is that you're able to get into things much earlier than other people are, and you're able to ride them up if obviously if you hold and you have conviction on it before someone else discovers it. And this is exactly what happens with pretty much everything. Like ETH, for example, for the longest time, ETH kind of like stayed below, I guess, like $10, $20, right? Since went live mid 2015. It was still $10 early 2017, and then it obviously blew up. And all those people who kind of like adopted, early on, and actually even sat through things like the DAO, they were laughing if they just held and didn't sell. Obviously, it was very hard to hold during the DAO and stuff like that, and it was a very different time back then. But same applies to 2019 and 2020 when the ETH prices were much lower. And this applies to so many other things, not just ETH. There's so many instances of this, guys, where the real alpha is just doing on-chain things. You may think it isn't, but I believe it still is, and I believe it will be like that for quite a while now. At least it will be kind of like in bull markets. Right now, it's still a bit of a PvP environment, as I discussed the other day, where there's not many kind of like retail users flooding in or anything like that. So it kind of becomes just the same money sloshing around, which can be quite shitty and quite hard to kind of, I guess, like play around with. But if you're a long-term investor, you don't really care for that sort of stuff. So yeah, anyway, moving on from that one onto the next big piece of news. I guess like the biggest piece of news over the last 24 hours was that 2 people have been arrested in relation to a massive hack that happened in 2016 to the centralized exchange Bitfinex. So this was huge news back in 2016. I believe it was 120,000 BTC that was stolen. Current worth is $3.6 billion. which is obviously a massive amount of money. Now, for those who don't know, the TLDR of this is that there was a hack that happened in 2016. They weren't able to ever track down the hackers until today. And the way Bitfinex actually made up for the loss that they suffered, because that was obviously a massive loss, is that they socialized the losses. So they cut everyone's holdings on the exchange by 36%. So they took 36% to like make themselves whole. That's what it means by like socializing the losses, which is obviously shit for people who had money on the exchange, but this is just another reason why you should never keep your coins on a centralized exchange. And then they promised that they would kind of like create a new token called Leo, and then they would use that token to kind of like repay, I guess like that, if you want to call it a debt, right? Or repay kind of like the losses that were socialized there. And in the original white paper for Leo, they basically said that if the BTC was ever returned, they would use, I think, a part of it or maybe all of it or something to kind of like purchase back Leo from the market until everyone was kind of like made whole there. At least I think that was the wording of it. I may be getting that wrong, misremembering it there. But that's why I guess like the Leo token has been pumping the last few days, and it kind of like makes sense there. But I guess like the other thing I wanted to talk about with regards to this is just how crazy it is. Like I'm sure you saw on Twitter today all the kind of like craziness, especially with the woman involved. So it's a husband and wife pair. So the wife led a very interesting online life. She did a lot of different things. Like she was apparently a rapper. She was apparently very involved with cybersecurity and kind of like advising BitGo on stuff and things like that. So very I guess like involved life there. And people were like, kind of looking at this, finding her TikToks, finding her Instagram post and being like, how is this person the Bitfinex hacker? And then there was so much around this. I mean, I'm not going to rehash it all here, but there was so much going on with this today. And I woke up to this and I was like, what the hell? Like, this is crazy. And I wasn't around in 2016. I came in early 2017, but this hack was spoken about for a very long time because it was just such a big deal. And obviously, there was the MT-Gox hack, but that happened in I mean, I guess with MT-Gox, it was kind of like they were insolvent for a while because BTC kept being stolen, but that happened in late 2013, early 2014 sort of thing there. And then, funny enough, in mid-2017, there was another major exchange that actually got shut down, BTCE, where there were kind of like, I guess, a bunch of Russian guys running this, and they got kind of like shut down by the FBI for money laundering, apparently with funds connected to MT-Gox. There's been some sketchy history with centralized exchanges, especially in the early days. If you want to kind of like read up on this, it's actually a pretty fun read, but a lot of this is kind of like scattered around and some crazy stories of all the stuff that was going on, obviously when the industry was a lot less mature than it is today. But this is kind of like a big deal. And obviously these people haven't been found guilty yet. They've just been arrested, and it's kind of like alleged that they did this. But I guess like the Justice Department is in control of these funds, so I'm assuming those funds are going to be returned to Bitfinex since they're the rightful owner of them, and then obviously the users of Bitfinex are the rightful owner of them as well. But yeah, very interesting bit of news, I guess. And if you weren't around back then, which I'm assuming a lot of you weren't, just from talking to you guys in the Discord channel, it seems like a lot of you guys are rather new to crypto, at least over the last few years, so you probably don't know how big of a deal this was. And as I said, I wasn't around in 2016, but this was still being talked about a lot in 2017. It was a very, very big deal. It was, I think, one of the largest hacks at the time ever since the MT-Gox fiasco, and Bitfinex was trusted. It was Bitfinex was like the BTC maximalist exchange, and in 2016 it was like just Bitcoin. I mean, if ETH was this really small, scrappy thing that no one really paid attention to, other than some small community, it was really it was all about Bitcoin back then still, and Bitfinex was where a lot of Bitcoin whales traded on, a lot of the OGs traded on, and yeah, that ended up being like quite a big deal there. So yeah, anyway, I'm not going to keep going on about that. I'm sure you've heard enough about it today. I'm going to move on to the next update. So I didn't see this yesterday before I did yesterday's refuel, but I saw it after. Apparently, Coinbase Wallet, at least their extension, has launched support for trading on Polygon using their DEX trading feature. So you can see here what trading is like using the 0x API on Ethereum versus on Polygon. So this is pretty cool to see. I mean, on Ethereum, it would cost you $60 to $80 in network fee. On Polygon, it's costing you 2 cents. Now, obviously, the Polygon PoS chain isn't a quote-unquote true L2, but I mean, at this point, I don't think it really matters. Like we've debated this to death. I think it's just great that users are able to get Obviously, cheaper fees here, but hopefully this is a sign of more things to come. I know this isn't an integration with the Coinbase exchange. There's no kind of like deposits or withdrawals into stuff, but they have promised that they're going to be supporting the Polygon PoS chain and things like that, and obviously other L2s and stuff. But I know I complained about this yesterday, but at least they're doing something. At least it's something to kind of like tide us over. But I really, really hope that more integrations are coming, because this sort of stuff is obviously very important, very bullish. When people see the network fee has been collapsed, and this would be collapsed on an optimistic roll-up too. This same trade should be under $5 on an optimistic roll-up, probably like $2 or $3 right now. Obviously not as cheap as 2 cents, but with optimistic roll-ups, you get the security of Ethereum. That is going to be like really great for users to see, because I think, I don't know. I've had this talk with you guys a lot about fees in the past, and how I think there's kind of like a certain threshold where it becomes like users start thinking in your heads, this is ridiculous. I don't think $2 to $3 is at the ridiculous mark for a lot of people, but obviously it's kind of like way too expensive, for the longer term. And that cost is going to come down over time. But I think while we're still in like the super early adopter phase, $2 to $3 is fine. That's going to keep coming down, but like $80 is definitely not fine. Like, that's just crazy. But like, people pay it, right? But yeah, cool to see the Coinbase Wallet extension supporting the Polygon PoS chain here. So a big announcement out of Celestia today. Now, I've spoken about Celestia before. They're a new data availability layer being spun up. They technically are a new layer 1 blockchain. So obviously, little to do with Ethereum, I guess, on the layer 1 side of things, but today they announced something called Celestiums, which are Ethereum L2 chains that use Celestia for data availability and Ethereum for settlement and dispute resolution. In other words, this is very similar to StarkWare's Validium, where the settlement and dispute resolution and proofs and everything are posted to Ethereum Layer 1, and the data, the data that would be normally posted to Ethereum Layer 1 as well, is posted kind of like off-chain onto, I guess in this case, Celestia. In StarkWare, Validium's case, it's just kind of like their own thing. And Immutable uses Validium and stuff like that. So yeah, I guess this is like exactly what Celestia is trying to do. They're trying to be a data availability layer for layer 2 chains, right? For things like rollups and stuff like that. Now, is it the same security that you get from a true rollup? No, it's not, because the data is somewhere else. The data is not on Ethereum, it is on Celestia. So if something happens on Celestia, then you're at the mercy of that. If the data gets kind of like withheld, or if the kind of like data gets deleted and you can't get it, then your funds are effectively frozen. They're not stolen, they can't steal your funds, but the funds are effectively frozen. So it's a cool kind of like hybrid approach to achieve more scalability before we get things like sharding. I think it's a good like short to medium term solution for the most secure things, but I still struggle to see why, if you have kind of like cheap data storage on Ethereum, that you would choose to store it off chain and kind of like reduce your security guarantee here, even if off-chain is a bit cheaper than on-chain Ethereum. So we're going to have to see how that plays out, but I do think that Celestia will play a big part in the kind of like Ethereum scaling roadmap going forward. I think their main competitor technically is sharding on Ethereum is a competitor to that, because they're both data availability layers, but also Polygon Veil, I believe, is a direct competitor to Celestia, because with Polygon Veil, Ethereum L2s can choose to settle on that as rather than Celestia, and do the same thing here, where they choose to put their data on that and settle on Ethereum still, and have dispute resolution on Ethereum as well still. So I think Celestia and Polygon are direct competitors. I don't think Celestia really competes with Polygon and Veil are direct competitors. I don't think Celestia really directly competes with Ethereum for data availability, in that it will never give you the same security guarantees that Ethereum L1 is going to give you. And when sharding comes along, and when we kind of like optimize layer 1 for rollups further, it's going to be a tough sell. But there are going to be times when you want to use off-chain data still, even though you get cheap on-chain data with Ethereum. And this is definitely for the lower value use cases. Like, most NFTs are lower value. You don't need Ethereum security for most NFT stuff. And that's why Immutable X is built as a Validium, because honestly, you don't, for most NFT, 99% of NFTs, you don't need the expensive Ethereum security. Just like you don't need an army to protect, your everyday kind of like belongings, right? Having the having a home security system is enough in most cases to protect your belongings, but obviously you have an army to protect your nation. Just like Ethereum is like, layer one is like this nation, and you have the decentralization and security of Ethereum to protect itself. But like, a lot of apps don't need that. I think DeFi needs that definitely, like finance and the things that need like a lot of security. But there are certainly a lot of use cases that don't need that, and that's where off-chain data availability comes into it. And something like Celestia or Polygon Avail is better than a homegrown solution like with StarkWare and having their kind of like off-chain on like some centralized servers, unless they start competing by issuing like a token and spinning up their own validators and decentralizing that network out, which I actually believe they will do. And I think ZK Sync will do this as well with ZK Porter. So there's going to be a battle between these data availability layers, and they're all going to use Ethereum to settle still. So I think that's actually really cool, is that we kind of like get the full modular approach here. And it's not just Ethereum working on it. It's Polygon, it's Celestia, it's the L2s working on this sort of stuff too. And I think that's going to be really exciting going forward. So very much looking forward to that. And I guess like looking forward to seeing how Celestia fares here as well. So Argent announced yesterday that you can now send from major exchanges to Argent ZK Sync, and it's 10 to 20 times cheaper than bridging from L1. You can send from Coinbase, FTX, Binance, and more using LayerSwap, which is basically a centralized service to get your funds from a centralized exchange that either supports or doesn't support layer 2s yet, and getting it directly from there to layer 2s. Now, as I said, it's a centralized service, so it is for as far as I know, it's custodial. So essentially, what you do is you send like your funds from the centralized exchange to like going through LayerSwap, and then LayerSwap will kind of like relay it for you. So it's a good like middle ground solution. It's definitely another middleman, but I think it's kind of like it's fine. But I do wonder with what kind of like what the future looks like for LayerSwap when these centralized exchanges all natively integrate with these L2s. But maybe they are very slow to integrate with the long tail of L2s, and LayerSwap can kind of like have a kind of like foot in the door there. But there are I guess like fees associated with this as well, and I think there are caps on it too. But it's a good solution if you want, if you're desperate to do this, and especially for kind of maybe lower value transfers, because I think there is a 0.4% kind of like fee on it. So for example, if you're doing like a $50 transfer from a centralized exchange to a layer 2, it doesn't make any sense to go through layer 1 to get there, because the fees are just going to eat into everything. But with a 0.4% kind of like flat fee, it's basically nothing, right? It's like 40 cents or probably 20 cents, I think, of that $50. Whereas if you're doing like a $10,000 kind of transaction there, I'm just doing the math in my head right now, it ends up being kind of like, I think, more expensive, or at least $10,000 one. Yeah, I think $10,000, or maybe even just like $100,000 or something. It just, depending on the percentage there, it ends up being more expensive than just going through Ethereum layer 1. And also the extra risk that you're taking on is probably not great. And as I said, there's caps on it, so you probably can't, there's limits on the amount of funds you can send through, so you probably can't do it anyway. But still, this is cool for like the lower value transfers for sure, and just getting some, $100 into L2s to get started playing. I think that's really cool that this service exists here, and that Argent is integrated with it. So last on the things to talk about with L2s, Prateek here has put together a list of people, builders, and projects active in the StarkWare ecosystem. So you can go to this StarkWare CT list and look at all the people and projects and stuff that are involved. You can follow this list here if you'd like. So this is a great way to keep up with the StarkWare ecosystem. And as you guys know, the StarkWare ecosystem has been growing pretty quickly lately with StarkNet and things like that. So definitely go check out this list if you want to keep up with it. It'll be linked in the YouTube description below. So Alchemy has announced another fundraise. I think they fundraised like 2 months ago or something like that. Anyway, it's another $200 million raise, which puts them at a $10.2 billion valuation. And the raise was co-led by Lightspeed Ventures and Silver Lake. So I guess congrats to Alchemy here. Huge raise. For those who don't know, Alchemy is infrastructure for blockchains, essentially. It's an inferior competitor where it provides kind of like node infrastructure in order to relay transactions and in order to kind of present information to certain people and to kind of integrate with other applications that need all this on-chain information. This is a big business, guys. Like, this is as big as the data analytics business is, and that's why the valuation is so high here. They can, the funny thing is it's so specialized, and this data is in such high demand that they can probably, charge a lot of money for it, and that's exactly why people want their hands on these companies. And as you guys know, Infura is part of Consensus. As far as I know, Infura doesn't raise on their own. Consensus obviously raised money recently, and I think they're doing another round right now. And that funds and pays for Infura, basically. So, cool to see this. Congrats to Alchemy on this raise here. Excited to see. This is a Series C, by the way. Series C-1. I think their last raise was a Series C as well. But excited to see kind of like, excited to see them get more funding here. All right, so it's finally launch day for Vesta Finance. It is now live on Arbitrum. So protocol and liquidity incentive programs have kickstarted on there, and whitelisting claiming will be available on Feb 9th at 7 a.m. PST, which I guess is happening, probably already happened by the time you've watched this video. So yeah, you can go onto Arbitrum and play around with Vesta today. For those of you who don't know, Vesta is a fork of Liquidity, and basically what you can do today is you can use, I believe, 3 different assets, being ETH, RenBTC, and GOM to mint VST, which is the stablecoin. And you can see the kind of like collateralization ratios here, minimum mint fee and minimum redemption fee and stuff like that. And there's, as I mentioned, liquidity incentive programs to participate in. There's a pool 2, a Vesta kind of like ETH pool here. There's Vesta being the native token, VST, the stablecoin, Frax on Curve, and there's a bunch of unlocks with whitelist and people have participated in the sale, with obviously lots more to come. Now, obviously, disclosure here, I'm an investor. You guys know that. I think that's the reason why you guys even know about Vesta, so I put it on your radar. But I'm hoping that you guys, just have another thing to play around with on Arbitrum, because I know a lot of you are on Arbitrum right now and are active on there right now. So definitely go check out Vesta if you haven't yet. So speaking of stablecoins, Maker announced that DAI has achieved $10 billionth in supply. So there's now 10 billion DAI out there, which is an awesome milestone, right? This is DAI's come a very, very long way, I think, in just a short amount of time. People often criticize Maker for being unscalable and for DAI not being able to scale as quickly as other, stablecoins out there, but I think Maker has always taken the safer approach to things. They've always taken kind of like the risk-off approach. They definitely want to build for stability over and security over kind of like speed and scale, which I think is long-term the better solution. But for the short to medium term, where kind of like the ecosystem is ruled by degens and is ruled by people who want like fast money, fast gains, the other kind of like decentralized stablecoins will, get more traction, get more growth. But a lot of them will actually blow up. A lot of them will not do what they say they're going to do. A lot of them will actually lose their peg. So I actually think that Maker should continue on the path that they've been on with taking the slow and steady and secure approach, because honestly, Maker is one of the only projects out there that I trust putting my ETH into, because they've been around for so long. I know they take the best kind of like practice approach to building their protocol. They're actually properly decentralized because they've actually got like a proper DAO. Yeah. I mean, as I said, like they're one of the only protocols that I trust my ETH into, and that's because of their slow and steady approach. When you're putting like your funds into these protocols that are moving fast and breaking things and doing degen stuff, it's fun. You can do it. You can do it with a little bit of money, but just expect to lose that. Like, honestly, guys, I mean, we've seen it play out time and time again. I've warned about this constantly. I mean, I saw people in the Discord channel today talking about like how I've been warning for ages, how it's really, really hard to outperform ETH if you buy another token, right? And outperform over the long term. And people, it definitely takes your own experience to kind of come to terms with this. Because over time, you see, even if you're holding like a token from like a project that you consider to be an awesome project and really, really bullish, it doesn't matter, because all of those tokens have worse tokenomics than ETH, and they're going to be outperformed by ETH. And it doesn't just apply to assets on Ethereum, it applies to assets everywhere. And that's why I, believe that ETH will outperform most things over the longer run, even though it's got a larger market cap. And then even still, even if you buy something that outperforms ETH by like 2 to 3x, is the extra risk you took on worth it in that case? Because you usually have to take on a lot more risk when buying other things. And I think in that kind of like case, we've seen this play out time and time again. It's riskier to buy tokens, to invest in stuff. It's riskier to use these protocols. It's riskier to buy the tokens that are associated with the protocols, because if something happens to the protocol, then the token goes down. There's all this kind of like stuff that happens. So I think that I love Maker's approach, but I guess to be fair, the MKR token hasn't really performed well either against ETH over the long run, and not so well against USD. But I think that's a separate issue. I don't think that's got to do with maker are necessarily not growing nicely, not having good future prospects. But I do think it's a consequence of their slow and steady approach, because they're not doing degen things for their token. They're not doing kind of like pool twos. They're not doing VE tokenomics. They're not doing. I mean, there was an idea to do it, floated to do it, but the only thing they're doing is kind of like burning excess MKR. But that's not enough for the market. The market doesn't really care about that. In, I guess, maybe the short to medium term, maybe the real long term, MKR ends up being a good bet. But for me, I mean, I remember someone asked me in like 2019, did I hold any MKR? And I said even back then, no, because I don't believe it's going to outperform ETH over the long run. And it hasn't. I think it was like 2 or 3 ETH back then per MKR. Now it's like 0.7 or something last time I checked. And I was pretty confident in that, because I just saw all the stuff coming for ETH and I was like, yeah, nah, this isn't going to happen here. But anyway, enough not investment advice for you guys there. Moving on to the last thing I wanted to talk about was just a shout out here to Matt Leising, who I was on his podcast with recently called Decent People. We actually spoke about mostly not Ethereum things on this podcast. So this was more like the Layer Zero I did with David Hoffman, where we spoke about kind of like my journey before crypto, what got me into crypto, what motivates me. And we actually went even further back with Matt, where I talked about kind of like my early life, my childhood, my schooling, my parents, stuff like that. So if you're interested in learning about that sort of stuff, definitely go give this podcast a listen. And Matt actually has a bunch of podcasts with other people as well in the Ethereum community. He really dives deep into non-crypto stuff with these people. So definitely go check out all of them as well. But on that note, I'm going to leave it at that. So thank you everyone for listening and watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to the newsletter, join the Discord channel, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Thanks everyone.